Now on WDBJ-7, it's a diagnosis no one wants to hear.
It's a day that we'll never, ever forget.
And it can be devastating. Families all across our hometowns know firsthand.
But kids know when something's wrong. Kids are very smart.
Tonight, messages of hope from families who've been there.
You always have in the back of your mind.
From diagnosis to treatment, and the attitude in between.
How do you feel?
Awesome.
Plus, new research happening right here at home.
We're trying to get down to the very fundamental basis of what's going wrong.
Personal stories and expert advice for loved ones.
And it's good to feel healthy again.
A special WDBJ-7 presentation. Your Family Matters. Crushing Cancer.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of WDBJ-7. I'm Jean Jadhunt.
And I'm Kimberly McBroom, and we're joining you from a Carilion Clinic Training Center. Whenever cancer strikes, it's difficult, but when the patient is only 5 years old, it's especially tough.
Tonight, we meet a Radford boy and hear about his journey. Sutton Smith is a boy of few words.
Tell me about that.
But like most 10-year-olds, he loves video games, Fortnite, and his favorite subject is social studies.
Jamestown and the Civil War and the Revolutionary War.
He also loves riding his bike. When you see him, it's hard to believe this child was sick, very sick. 5 years ago, he could barely make the short walk to school.
When I went to pick him up, I said, how was school? You know, what'd you do? Did you play on the playground? And he said, no, I was too tired. I just sat and watched everybody.
A trip to the doctor and many blood tests later, and then the phone call no parent ever wants to get.
So we knew something was really bad.
5-year-old Sutton was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, or ALL, one of the most common types of childhood cancer.
I mean, you know, cancer, you're cancer.
But the couple made a decision.
Sitting around and feeling sorry for yourself and boo-hooing about the situation is not helping anything. So let's take it head on, you know. Don't let cancer define you. And that's the attitude we took.
Within 24 hours, they had a Facebook page, Super Sutton's Great Adventure. The treatments also started quickly.
He had had a chest x-ray, he had had a bone marrow aspirate, he had had a lumbar puncture, 2 doses of chemotherapy, and had been admitted into the hospital.
The first 8 months were especially tough.
It's at least once a week injections. Sometimes it was every day, and I did the injections into his thigh.
Sutton's treatment is what the Smiths call a journey.
It wasn't just when he looked sick and didn't have any hair and was puffy from the steroids. His treatment went on for just over 3 years, and he took pills or injections every day of that.
While Anthony and Mary remember it all, perhaps the best thing for Sutton, he doesn't. A book filled with screenshots of the many Facebook posts chronicles it all.
So this says next chemo treatment in the morning. Do you remember having chemo treatments?
Kinda.
Did it not make you feel good? Or you don't really remember a lot of it, do you? That's a good thing, right?
Now, years later, those days are just a faint memory for this 10-year-old who's riding into a bright future.
Just this past weekend, we hiked Tinker Cliffs, which is 7 miles round trip.
He's a normal kid again.
An amazing journey for the Smith family. Sutton is no longer on treatment, and doctors say his prognosis is great. He is still, of course, going to the doctor for checkups. Talking about cancer is tough, so how do you talk to kids about it? Dr. Violet Borovich at Carilion Children says it's important to involve kids as much as possible in their diagnosis and treatment. She says kids are smart and they know when something's wrong.
And I've told families it's actually more important to talk to your kids about what's going on because they actually feel more fear when they're not involved, when things are happening to them without them being involved in what's going on.
Several books geared toward kids can help. Books on chemotherapy and going to school with cancer. They feature brightly colored drawings and words children can understand. If you have a sick child, you have a sick family. Cancer impacts everyone who loves the person suffering from it.
Yeah, sometimes though, as you're about to hear in Jilly's story, the experience can make a family stronger.
She doesn't act like this except when we're around a bunch of people.
How many moms have said that about their 3-year-olds? You're silly. Silly Jilly. Jilly and Travis loves talking about her favorite Disney princesses.
Cinderella and Ariel.
But a year ago, Jilly wasn't feeling so playful.
She was having night sweats and just fatigued and losing weight and not eating.
After some blood work, doctors diagnosed Jilly with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. She's now cancer-free and full of personality. Jilly still needs monthly chemo until November of next year to make sure the cancer doesn't come back. Her illness has made her parents even more focused on their family.
I took off the last year to be with her, and it's, that was a blessing that I was able to do that. I just recently went back to work doing something different, but it's, you kind of have to reprioritize.
Life's gotten more complex, but it's simplified in a way because we know it's important.
The Travis family lives in the Dublin area. Traveling back and forth to the hospital in Roanoke was rough at times.
We alternated between the hotel and the hospital. Usually one of us would try and get sleep and the other one would stay in the room and then alternate the next night.
That's an all too familiar situation for many parents with sick kids. Back in 1974, a 3-year-old's battle with cancer led her parents to help create the first Ronald McDonald House.
They just described that time of being in the hospital as being very lonely, sleeping in waiting rooms, eating out of vending machines, and of course they noticed that other families were going through similar experiences.
There are now 365 Ronald McDonald houses all over the world, including this one in Roanoke.
An 18-bedroom facility. We have a dining room. We have laundry facilities. We have families that are staying with us anywhere from, a day to 7 months.
Families who stay here must live at least 25 miles away and have a medical referral. As for the Travis family, they're hoping that the toughest days at the hospital are behind them. The experience has made them more resilient.
Not every day is going to be a good day, and being able to cope with that and find healthy ways to cope.
Jilly's year of trips to the hospital haven't only healed her, they may have also inspired her plans for when she grows up.
Whenever she plays with dolls now, she's the doctor, and they're not feeling well, so she's going to take care of them.
The Travises say they got through this with the love and support from their family and the community, and now they plan to pay it forward. Whether you're taking care of a sick child, a sick spouse, or a parent who has cancer, taking care of them can take its toll on you. Caregivers are at risk of emotional burnout, so it's important for them to also take care of themselves. Lisa Sprinkle is a senior director for home care and hospice at Carilion Clinic. While getting care in their home is often better for the patient, she says it can cause stress and anxiety for the caregiver.
When you are providing care to someone who is dependent on you for their meal preparation and their personal care and their bathing and toileting, that can be a very demanding role, and one that can be somewhat isolating.
Sprinkle says there are free resources available to help caregivers, and here are a few of them. Often volunteers from local churches, the LOA Area Agency on Aging, and hospice are willing to come sit with the patient while a caregiver takes a needed break. We sat down with a nurse practitioner with Blue Ridge Cancer Care who knows firsthand how difficult it can be for caregivers. She offered some insight on how you can help them and some signs to look out for. Julie, let's talk a little bit about your background and why you decided to go into oncology care.
When I was 12 years old, I was affected by cancer. My grandfather was diagnosed with lung cancer when I was 12 years old. Dr. Schertz was his doctor, and I grew up wanting to work for Dr. Schertz.
Your experience with cancer personally touched you and kind of led you down this path,
Yes.
it sounds like.
Yes, and I feel like that's why I have a great connection with my patients, is because I've sat in that chair as a family member, and I know how it feels to walk out of that building and know that the loved one you're with has cancer and you can't get rid of it.
Let's talk about the caregiver, because that's a role that nobody plans to be in.
Right.
You know, it's something that just sort of happens to you.
Right.
What happens exactly psychologically, physically to the caregiver?
Basically, it's a role that you are thrown into. You may be ready, you may not be ready, but you are thrown into it. In my case, it was my mom who had cancer, so she was my leader, she was my matriarch, she was my strong person, she was who I went to when I had issues. So the roles changed, and I had to become the parent and the strong one, and it's very, very difficult.
How is the stress different from taking care of a parent versus a spouse, a child?
With my mom, I resigned from my position, and that was our deal, that I would take care of her no matter what. I was able to afford that luxury and that benefit of spending that time with her, but there are so many people who work full time. They get up, they go to work, and then they come home and they're still on. They have no downtime, they have no rest, they have no break from their role.
So that means burnout is going to happen.
Oh, absolutely.
How, if the caregiver recognizes this, like I'm exhausted, I'm physically sick or emotionally sick or just worn out, what are some things that they can do to help themselves if they do recognize this? I'm thinking that most of them don't.
They feel like that loved one is counting on them. In my respect, I also got the feedback from my mom that she didn't want anybody seeing her in this state. She didn't want them seeing her sick. She didn't want them seeing her with her facial deformity. So it was she wouldn't let anyone else in.
Thankfully, you were able to take on that role. You're that kind of person that could do that. Yeah. What if you're not that kind of person? What if you literally can't do it, whether it's you don't want to accept the reality of the situation, or you lack the organizational skills.
Yes.
There's so many reasons that people aren't cut out for it.
Usually there's a family member, a friend, a church. When my patients come to our office, I am just a huge support system. Our whole clinic is a great support system. They will find someone that will help balance them out. And sometimes it takes nothing more than someone stopping by and handing you a casserole and saying, I'm gone, here.
Yeah.
That was one of the biggest memories I had when I was taking care of my mom. I just was having one of those days where nothing was going right. And I've worked in oncology for 18 years, but nothing was going right. And one of my friends from nursing school stopped by and had drinks and food, and that I remember that being just what I needed at that time.
It was just that gesture, that small thing, just to give you a break where you didn't have to worry about cooking that night.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, Jolie, thank you so much for talking with us. Some great insight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Coming up, we'll take a look at how to overcome the emotional battles that come with recovery.
And there is a lot of research being done right here at home. We head inside the lab to see what a team is finding out about breast cancer.
Many of us have been there when our friends or loved ones receive their final chemo treatment or ring that bell for the final time, marking what appears to be the end of their battle.
But actually, anxiety can remain well into remission. Doctors call it cancer PTSD. WDBJ7's Liana Scacchetti shows us the tools used to combat it.
For cancer patients, a chance to ring the bell signaling the end of treatment is long awaited, but peace of mind might not ring as clearly.
Even up until the time that an oncologist tells you you're free to go to a regular doctor now, I personally still get anxiety of it's happened before. I know it can happen again.
Kathy Cockrell has been a paramedic for years, working and teaching others how to treat the toughest patients, but she's still dealing with how to treat herself. She's dealt with several cancer scares and surgeries, and while her doctors say she's doing great now, worry lingers.
You always have in the back of your mind, is this my year?
All too often, they're missing the diagnosis of what is genuinely post-traumatic stress disorder.
Dr. Robert Tressman is a lead psychiatrist with Carilion Clinic. He says many cancer patients and survivors also experience anxiety and depression, which may never even be diagnosed.
And this is a situation where your own body is turning against you. And you can't even have a sense of certainty about who you are and that your body is working to support you, because in this way it's not.
Dr. Tressman says patients or those close to them should ask, do you avoid the topic of cancer? Do you feel at times emotionally numb? Do you have dreams about your diagnosis or treatment? If so, Tressman recommends reaching out to a professional who can help.
When those are treated, they're able to tolerate chemotherapy and radiation, recover from surgery far better than those without those supports.
Dr. Tressman says the healthcare industry has room to grow in recognizing these symptoms in their patients and allowing for access to resources. Cockrell agrees.
To know that you have somebody that you can talk to unconditionally, that's super helpful.
In Roanoke, Leanna Scacchetti, WDBJ7.
We just heard from cancer survivors about dealing with PTSD, but something that could eventually help: more research.
Yeah, WDBJ7's Caitlin Francis recently spoke with some researchers at the Virginia Tech Carilion Research Institute about some potentially groundbreaking discoveries for breast cancer.
Angelina Jolie informed the world of her BRCA mutation back in 2013, putting the cancer-causing gene in the national spotlight. But what is BRCA?
So BRCA1 and BRCA2, or BRCA1 and BRCA2, are genes actually that we all have. And they participate in something called tumor suppression that should actually be protecting us from cancer in our lifetime. But some people are born with mutations in their genes, changes that actually prevent them from doing the work that they should do.
Which leads to certain types of cancer for some people, and researchers here at Virginia Tech Carilion Research Institute are working to find out more about the gene and looking even closer at what the underlying mutation is.
So that gene is the genetic storage unit for the BRCA1 protein. And our lab works very specifically on the BRCA1 protein and how that gives way to helping cancer develop in the body.
That protein within the BRCA gene is actually found in all tissue in the body, not just breast tissue.
The protein works with a lot of other proteins in a big assembly like a factory that is your cell. And inside this factory, there are lots of different parts that come together and exquisitely control the output of the cell toward a normal development or normal maintenance. And when one of these little parts goes wrong, anything can prohibit the assembly line from functioning properly.
Kelly and her team found an extra piece attached to the BRCA1 protein in tumors. That protein is shaped like a C, but with an extra bit that they're hoping to correct.
Our goal would be to see what we can fix in terms of its biological mechanism, and if not, can we turn those into vulnerabilities by which we can attack cancer more readily.
When we're doing a genetic test in my office, we're really talking about the genes that we were born with. So our sort of two fields run in parallel to one another, and I certainly think have some commonalities. But right now, we're still figuring out exactly what those commonalities are.
And so far, initial tests to remove that extra piece to the BRCA1 protein have been successful. If they succeed in correcting the protein, they can eventually work more closely with physicians like Lydia Higgs and reduce the level of anxiety for people who have those mutations, giving them a better quality of life. In Roanoke, Caitlin Francis, WDBJ7.
All too many people are familiar with the effects of chemotherapy, but it's a necessary evil in the battle against cancer.
But now at Carilion Clinic, they are trying a new approach. As WDBJ7's Christian Heilman reports, they are using an old technique in a new way.
By all accounts, Ben Bain is pretty fit.
I don't know, 7, maybe a little bit less. If I was running a single mile.
A 7-minute mile plus an avid biker, he's always been moving.
I always joke with people the best way to motivate somebody to exercise is to take away their ability to do so for a year.
December 22nd, 2016, he was diagnosed with cancer and forced to go through 14 rounds of chemo.
It was a lot to me.
He spent weeks in the hospital and nearly a year away from exercise.
I mean, I know what it's like to feel just absolutely awful for a year and just to not be able to do stuff.
While he was going through treatment, he was also giving input on his experience to Karen Anderson. She was developing a new program. Its goal? Reduce the number of chemo treatments by prescribing exercise.
What we're seeing is we have a lot of knowledge to know that we can help reduce the side effects, and yet it's not being prescribed.
Here at Carilion Wellness, chemo patients get assigned a physical trainer of sorts. That trainer comes up with a personalized workout routine that challenges them and helps them get stronger in their fight against cancer.
If you can get fit through a disease or a diagnosis, then it's a lot easier to manage.
Now, Ben is in remission and back to being active. He's hoping this new program will reduce pain on other people's paths to being cancer-free. In Roanoke, Christian Heilman, WDBJ 7.
Research going on at the Virginia Tech Veterinary School will hopefully lead to better cancer care for humans. Cancer is the most common cause of death in dogs, and it is very similar in human cancer. Multiple studies going on at the school are looking into several types of cancer, including glioblastoma, which is a brain cancer, and liver cancer.
But before we can get it back into humans, we're testing it out in dogs. And so the dogs are benefiting from this treatment, and then with the ultimate goal of further benefiting humans. So it's a big circle.
The school is also in the process of moving its oncology center to Roanoke. Here, the vets will work alongside cancer researchers for humans. The goal is to lead the way to better collaboration and ultimately discoveries for cancer care.
Now on WDBJ-7, what does it take to keep your children safe? After recent school shootings, a local father who survived the Virginia Tech massacre talks about his experience.
I froze for about what seemed like an eternity.
And his concerns for his kids.
Do you think that we've learned something from Virginia Tech?
Plus,
time equals lives. And we know that from a training standpoint.
What they're doing to keep their buildings secure. And beyond the classroom, how young people are handling challenges with their peers and possible predators.
You're more likely to listen to your friend than your parents.
Personal stories and expert advice for every family. Nothing's more important than keeping our children safe.
If our teachers don't feel safe, if our students don't feel safe, we can't educate them effectively.
WDBJ-7 presents Your Family Matters, keeping kids safe.
We want to thank you for joining us for the special edition of WDBJ-7 tonight. I'm Kimberly McBroom.
And I'm Jean Jadhunt. School safety. It is on the minds of parents all across America. It has been nearly 2 weeks since 10 people were killed after a school shooting at Santa Fe High School in Texas. It has become a scene that is all too familiar, emergency vehicles surrounding campus and parents waiting to possibly hear the worst. Students who survived those moments describe them as scary but not surprising. The alleged gunman, a former student, has been charged with capital murder.
And the students of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida know that situation all too well. Back in February, it was their campus that was attacked. 17 students and teachers were killed. Many of the students called for action, and President Trump promised to respond.
One Roanoke County man agrees more must be done. Derek Odell knows what it's like in a classroom when a school shooting happens. He was hit with gunfire in the Virginia Tech shootings and survived. 32 people were killed in that massacre. Now Odell is taking part in the national discussion to try to keep our children safe. On a pretty spring day, it's hard to think about what happened at Virginia Tech, but Derek Odell still has the physical scar on his arm to remind him.
Went through my arm this way.
The spot where a bullet went into one side of his arm and exited out the other. Now, 11 years later, Odell is married to his college sweetheart, who's a school teacher, and they're parents of a 2-year-old, Maisie.
You're a dad now of a little girl. How do you react when you hear school shootings and think about school safety? Do you have a different viewpoint now that you're a parent?
Absolutely. I was sending my wife off to work each day and watching my daughter go to a preschool and eventually a public school. It's terrifying to think that they may experience the same thing that I did and may not make it home that day. And heart and lungs sound great there.
Odell hopes to be part of the solution. The now veterinarian took time away from his practice to go to Washington, D.C. He was invited to speak before the Federal Commission on School Safety. Odell has a unique point of view. He can tell panel members what it's like in a classroom when a shooting happens. He says he always thought of himself as someone who's prepared, but when a gunman entered a German class he was in at Tech,
when a shooter entered my classroom and started shooting, I froze. I froze for about what seemed like an eternity.
Did you fall to the ground? Or were you just sitting in a chair and just in shock?
I was sitting in my classroom chair trying to figure out what the heck was going on. And it took the barrel of the gun pointing towards me to actually invoke some type of reflex in me to move. And fortunately I did, and quick enough, but that's when I got shot.
Do you think that we've learned something from Virginia Tech?
I think At certain points, we learn slowly about what happens at each individual school shooting. The hard part is it seems like these school shooters are learning quicker than we do.
Odell says after the Virginia Tech shooting, locks were put on classroom doors, not just at Tech, but around the nation. He also believes in identifying individuals who pose a threat, but he admits there is no easy solution.
Whether it's easy access to guns, whether it's the people that have these mental health issues in a lot of the cases of school shootings, whether we get them the help that they need early, whether it's, parents involving their children and See Something and Say Something campaign to make sure we identify these people. So a lot of people have their stance on certain issues, and it's hard to overcome that. But if you look at this as a nonpartisan issue and trying as a collective whole come across school safety for our children that preserves their safety in the school, I think it's a much easier issue to address at that point.
Now, the Federal Commission on School Safety is made up of multiple agencies, but Derek Odell told me the first meeting was postponed, and the next meeting, he says, only the Department of Education showed up. Homeland Security, the Attorney General were no-shows. He is urging people to contact their lawmakers to push to make school safety a priority at the federal level. Across our hometown, school divisions are planning how to respond should a school shooting happen here.
Yeah, a lot of parents talking about this one. WDBJ7's Kristen Heilman spoke with them about what goes on behind the scenes to keep our kids safe in the classroom.
When the images from Santa Fe and Parkland.tv screens, they serve as another chance for schools to re-examine their crisis plans.
Is there anything for us to learn? Is there anything that we need to change?
Brenda Drake with Montgomery County Public Schools says that's exactly what they asked after Parkland. Their review found that the division is planning appropriately, partly due to technology they have in place. Last year, the division installed CopSync, which allows teachers in any classroom to activate a lockdown, alerting dispatchers and the 5 nearest officers.
The critical component is the amount of time that is cut out in the middle.
Lieutenant Mark Hollinsworth says that time can mean the difference between life and death. Franklin and Bedford counties use this technology too.
I think it helps provide a huge peace of mind for our teachers, for our parents, and for our older students who can understand it.
Safety is number one.
In Botetourt County, Superintendent John Busher says they're always examining their plans, and they invite state police and sheriff's deputies to do paperwork in their parking lots.
So in the event that there was an emergency, they are familiar with the structural of the building already and even the grounds.
Meanwhile, in Roanoke County, work will soon begin on these grounds. Cave Spring High School will be renovated and expanded. The project hit a couple-week delay because the school board asked the architects to go review their plans. After Parkland, they asked them to see if there are any ways to make the new school even safer.
Now's the time to do it. It's not to do it after you've built the school and you say, oh, I wished we would have.
Board member Mike Ray says the architects did make some changes to traffic flow. Other adjustments included new types of windows and building materials.
There are a lot of safety factors that are in today's world that weren't several years ago.
Those changes over the years also prompted Roanoke City to hire a new chief of security. Chris Perkins is the former chief of police, now taking this post to keep students and staff safe while maintaining balance.
The last thing I want is for our schools to look like a fortress.
There are many details divisions can't talk about when it comes to safety, but what they can share is that it's always in the forefront. In Roanoke, Christian Heilman, WDBJ 7.
Joining us now on our panel of experts is Morgan Harrington's mother, Jill Harrington. Jill, you and your husband, Dan, started Help Save the Next Girl as a positive way to remember your daughter. What message do you have that Help Save the Next Girl tries to get across for young people who may be watching when it comes to predators, both online and in person?
Jean, we really have tried to harness the power of peer relationships that young people have and teach kids in our Help Save the Next Girl chapters that they are responsible for their own personal safety, but there also is a parallel responsibility that they have for their friends and for other students in the school. And sometimes it comes to something as simple as we say, buddy up. You know, it is almost unheard of to find young women who have been abducted in pairs. Predators seek out the single. They lure them away or they find them alone, and then they make their crimes.
This entire panel is going to stay with us on our Facebook page live. If you have questions, join us just here in a few seconds where we'll ask also, what if your kids are afraid to go to school?
And I run into that too, talking to my own kids. We'll keep the conversation going on Facebook Live. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night.